Chapter 32 Through the Gates of Gold. My mother, my home in the land of bright day. I am joined by Benedetto. I was always fond of watching the clouds float over the sky and shape themselves into pictures suggested by my thoughts. Since I reached the second sphere of the spirit land, my skies have always had clouds floating over them. Lovely light fleecy clouds which shape themselves into 1,000 forms and take on the most lovely shades of color, sometimes becoming rainbow-hued and at others of the most dazzling white, and then again vanishing away altogether. I have been told by some spirits that in their skies they never see a cloud, all is serene clear beauty. And no doubt it is so in their lands, for in the spirit world our thoughts and wishes form our surroundings. Thus, because I love to see clouds, they are to be seen in my sky, at times veiling and softening its beauties and making cloud castles for me to enjoy. Now, some time after I obtained my little home in the morning land, I began to see between myself and my cloud pictures a vision which, like the mirage seen in the desert, hovered on the horizon. Distinct and lifelike, only to melt away as I gazed. This was a most lovely ethereal gate of wrought gold, such as might be the entrance to some fairy land. A clear stream of water flowed between myself and this gate, while trees so fresh, so green, so aerial, they seemed like fairy trees, arched their branches over it and clustered at the sides. Again and again did I see this vision, and one day while I was gazing at it, my father came unnoticed by me and stood by my side. He touched my shoulder and said, "Franchezzo, that gate is inviting you to go nearer and see it for yourself. It is the entrance to the highest circle of this second sphere, and it is within those gates that your new home is waiting for you. You might have gone some time ago into those circles which lie between you and it, had not your affection for this little cottage made you content to remain in it. Now, however, it would be as well for you to go forth and see if the wonders of that new land will not still more delight you. I am, as you know, in the third sphere, which will, therefore, be still above you, but the nearer you approach to me, the more easily can I visit you. And in your new home we shall be much oftener together." I was so surprised I could not answer for a little time. It seemed incredible that I should be able so soon to pass those gates. Then, taking my father's advice, I bade a regretful adieu to my little home, for I grow much attached to places which I lived long in, and set forth to journey to this new country. The gate shining before me all the time, not fading away as it had done before. In the spirit land, where the surface is not that of a round globe as with the planets, you do not see the objects on the horizon vanishing in the same way, and earth and sky meeting at last as one. Instead you see the sky as a vast canopy overhead, and the circles which are above you seem like plateaux resting upon mountain tops on your horizon. And when you reach those mountains, and see the new country spread out before you, there are always on its horizon again more mountains and fresh lands lying higher than those you have reached. Thus also you can look down on those you have passed as upon a succession of terraces, each leading to a lower, less beautiful one, till at last you see the earth plain surrounding the earth itself. And then beyond that again, for those spirits whose sight is well developed, lie another succession of terrace-like lands leading down to hell. Thus circle melts into circle and sphere into sphere. Only that between each sphere there exists a barrier of magnetic waves which repels those from a lower sphere who seek to pass it until their condition has become in harmony with the higher sphere. In my journey to the Golden Gates I passed through several circles of this second sphere, whose cities and dwelling places would have tempted me to linger and admire them had I not been so eager to view the fair land which was now the goal of my hopes. I knew, moreover, that I could at any time on my way to Earth stop and explore those intermediate lands, because a spirit can always retrace his steps if he desires and visit those below him. At last I reached the top of the last range of mountains between me and the Golden Gates, and saw stretched out before my eyes a most lovely country. Trees waved their branches as in welcome to me, and flowers blossomed everywhere, while at my feet was the shining river, and across it the Golden Gates. With a great sense of joy in my heart I plunged into that beautiful river to swim across, its refreshing waters closing over my head as I dived and swam. I had taken no heed to my clothing, and as I landed on the farther side I looked to see myself dripping with water, but in a moment I found my clothing as dry as could be, and what was still stranger, My gray robe with its triple bordering of white had changed into one of the most dazzling snowy luster with a golden girdle and golden bordering. At the neck and wrists it was clasped with little plain gold clasps, and seemed to be like the finest muslin in texture. I could scarce believe my senses. I looked and looked again, and then, with a trembling, beating heart I approached those lovely gates. As my hand touched them they glided apart and I passed into a wide road bordered by trees and flowering shrubs and plants of most lovely hues, like flowers of earth, indeed, but how much more lovely, how much more fragrant no words of mine can convey to you. The waving branches of the trees bent over me in loving welcome as I passed. The flowers seemed to turn to me as greeting one who loved them well. At my feet there was the soft green sward. And overhead a sky so clear, so pure, so beautiful, the light shimmering through the trees as never did the light of earthly sun. Before me were lovely blue and purple hills and the gleam of a fair lake, upon whose bosom tiny islets nestled crowned with the green foliage of groups of trees. Here and there a little boat skimmed over the surface of the lake filled with happy spirits clad in shining robes of many different colors, so like to earth, so like my beloved southern land. And yet so changed, so glorified, so free from all taint of wrong and sin. As I passed up the broad flower-girt road a band of spirits came to meet and welcome me, amongst whom I recognized my father, my mother, my brother and a sister, besides many beloved friends of my youth. They carried gossamer scarves of red, white and green colors, which they were waving to me, while they strewed my path with masses of the fairest flowers as I approached. And all the time they sang the beautiful songs of our own land and welcome, their voices floating on the soft breeze in the perfection of unison and harmony. I felt almost overcome with emotion. It seemed far too much happiness for one like me. And then my thoughts even in that bright scene turned to earth, to her who was of all the most dear to me, where all were so dear, and I thought, alas that she is not here to share with me the triumphs of this hour. She to whose love more than to any other thing I owe it. As the thought came to me I suddenly beheld her spirit beside me, half asleep, half conscious. Freed for a brief moment from the earthly body and borne in the arms of her chief guardian spirit. Her dress was of the spirit world, white as a bride's and shimmering with sparkling gems like dewdrops. I turned and clasped her to my heart, and at my touch her soul awoke and she looked smilingly at me. Then I presented her to my friends as my betrothed bride, and while she was still smiling at us all, her guide again drew near and threw over her a large white mantle. He lifted her in his arms once more, and like a tired child she seemed to sink into slumber as he bore her away to her earthly body, which she had left for a time to share and crown this supreme moment of my joy. Ah, me! Even in my joy I felt it hard to let her go, to think I could not keep her with me. But the thread of her earthly life was not yet fully spun, and I knew that she like others must travel the path of her earthly pilgrimage to its end, when my beloved was gone. My friends all clustered round me with tender embraces. My mother, whom I had never seen since I was a little child, caressing my hair and covering my face with kisses, as though I had been still the little son whom she had left on earth so many years ago that his memory of her had been but dim, and that the father had supplied the image of both parents in his thoughts. Then they led me to a lovely villa almost buried in the roses and jasmine which clustered over its walls and twined around the slender white pillars of the piazza, forming a curtain of flowers upon one side. What a beautiful home it seemed! How much beyond what I deserved! Its rooms were spacious, and there were 7 of them, each typical of a phase in my own character or some tastes I had cultivated. My villa was upon the top of a hill overlooking the lake which lay many hundreds of feet below, its calm waters rippled by magnetic currents, and the surrounding hills mirrored in its quiet bosom. And beyond the lake there was a wide valley. As one looks down from a mountain top to the low hills and the dark valley and level plains below, so did I now look down from my new dwelling upon a panorama of the lower spheres and circles through which I had passed, to the earth plane and again to the earth itself, which lay like a star far below me. I thought as I looked at it that there dwelt still my beloved, and there yet lay the field of my labors. I have sat many times since gazing out on that lone star, the pictures of my past life floating in a long wave of memory across my daydream. and with all my thoughts was interwoven the image of her who is my guiding star. The room from which I could see this view of the distant earth was my music room, and in it were musical instruments of various kinds. Flowers festooned the walls, and soft draperies the windows, which required no glass in their frames to keep out the soft zephyrs of that fair land. Oh, honeysuckle, that was surely the same sweet plant which had so rejoiced my heart in my little cottage in the morning land, trailed its fragrant tendrils around the window. And on one of the walls hung my picture of my darling, framed with its pure white roses, which always seemed to me an emblem of herself. Here, too, I again found all my little treasures which I had collected in my dark days, when hope seemed so far and the shadow of night was ever over me. The room was full of soft masses of lovely spirit flowers, and the furniture was like that of earth, only more light in appearance, more graceful and beautiful in every way. There was a couch which I much admired. It was supported by 4 half-kneeling figures of wood nymphs, carved as it would seem from a marble of the purest white, and even more transparent than alabaster. Their extended arms and clasped hands formed the back and the upper and lower ends. Their heads were crowned with leaves, and their floating draperies fell around their forms in so graceful, so natural a manner. It was difficult to believe they were not living spirit maidens. The covering of this couch was of a texture like swan's down, only it was pale gold in color. So soft was it, it seemed to invite one to repose, and often have I lain upon it and looked out at the lovely scene, and away to the dim star of earth with its weary pilgrims, its toiling souls. The next apartment was filled with beautiful pictures, lovely statues, and tropical flowers. It was almost more like a conservatory than a room, the pictures being collected at one end of it, and the statues and flowers forming a foreground of beauty that was like another and larger picture. There was a little grotto with a fountain playing, the water sparkling like diamonds, and rippling over the sides of the smaller basin into one larger still, with a murmuring sound which suggested a melody to me. Near this grotto is one picture which attracted me at once, for I recognized it as a scene from my earthly life. It was a picture of one calm and peaceful evening in early summer, when my beloved and I had floated on the quiet waters of an earthly river. The setting sun glowing in the west was sinking behind a bank of trees, while the great twilight crept over the hollows through the shade of the trees. And in our hearts there was a sense of peace and rest which raised our souls to heaven. I looked around and recognized many familiar scenes, which had likewise been full of happiness for me and in whose memories there was no sting. There were also many pictures of my friends, and of scenes in the spirit world. From the windows I could behold another view than from my music room. This view showed those lands which were yet far above me, and whose towers and minarets and mountains shone through a dim haze of bright mist, now rainbow-hued, now golden, or blue, or white. I loved to change from the one view to the other, from the past which was so clear, to the future that was still dim, still veiled for me. In this picture salon there was all which could delight the eye or rest the body, for our bodies require repose as well as do yours on earth. And we can enjoy to rest upon a couch of down earned by our labors as much as you can enjoy the possession of fine furniture bought with gold earned by your work on earth. Another saloon was set apart for the entertainment of my friends, and here again, as in the lower sphere, there were tables set out with a feast of simple but delicious fruits, cakes, and other agreeable foods like earthly foods, only less material, and there was also the delicious sparkling wine of the spirit world which I had before mentioned. Another room again was full of books recording my life and the lives of those whom I admired or loved. There were also books upon many subjects, the peculiarity in them being that instead of being printed they seemed full of pictures, which when one studied them appeared to reflect the thoughts of those who had written the books more eloquently than any words. Here, too, one could sit and receive the inspired thoughts of the great poets and literary men who inhabit the sphere above, and here have I sat, and inscribed upon the blank pages of some book laid open before me, poems to her who filled the larger half of all my thoughts. From this room we passed out to the garden, my father saying he would show me my chamber of repose, after our friends were gone. Here, as in the house, flowers were everywhere, for I always loved flowers. They spoke to me of so many things, and seemed to whisper such bright fancies, such pure thoughts. There was a terrace around the house, and the garden seemed almost to overhang the lake, especially at one secluded corner which was fenced in with a bank of ferns and flowering shrubs, and backed by a screen of trees. This nook was a little to the side of the house, and soon became my favorite resort. The ground was carpeted with soft green moss as you have not on earth, and flowers grew all around. Here there was a seat whereon I loved to sit and look away to the earth, and fancy where my beloved one's home would be. Across all those millions of miles of space my thoughts could reach her as hers could now reach me. For the magnetic cord of our love stretched between us, and no power could ever shut us out from each other again. When I had seen and admired all, my friends led me back to the house, and we all sat down to enjoy the feast of welcome which their love had prepared for me. Ah, what a happy feast that was! How we proposed the progression and happiness of each one, and then drank our toast in wine which left no intoxication behind. No after reckoning of shame to mar its refreshing qualities. How delicious seemed this fruit, these numerous little delicacies which were all the creations of someone's love for me. It seemed too much happiness. I felt as in a delightful dream from which I must surely wake. At last all my friends left except my father and mother, and by them I was conducted to the upper chambers of the house. They were 3 in number. 2 were for such friends as might come to stay with me, and both were most prettily furnished, most peaceful looking. The 3rd room was for myself, my own room, where I would retire when I desired to rest and to have no companion but my own thoughts. As we entered, the thing which attracted me most and filled me with more astonishment than anything I had yet seen, was the couch. It was of snowy white gossamer, bordered with pale lilac and gold, while at the foot were 2 angels, carved, like the wood nymphs, out of the dazzling white alabaster I have vainly tried to describe. They were much larger than myself or any spirits whom I had seen, and their heads and extended wings seemed almost to touch the roof of my room. And the pose of these 2 most lovely figures was perfect in its grace. Their feet scarce touched the floor, and with their bending forms and half-outstretched wings they appeared to hover over the bed, as though they had but just arrived from their celestial sphere. They were male and female forms, the man wearing on his head a helmet and bearing in his hand a sword, while the other hand held aloft a crown. His figure was the perfection of manly beauty and grace, and his face with its perfect features so firmly molded, expressing at once strength and gentleness, had to my eyes a look of calm regal majesty that was divine. The female figure at his side was smaller, more delicate in every way. Her face was full of gentle, tender, womanly purity and beauty. The eyes large and soft even though carved in marble, the long tresses of her hair half veiling her head and shoulders. One hand held a harp with 7 strings, the other rested upon the shoulder of the male angel as though she supported herself with his strength, while the lovely head was half bent forward and rested upon her arm, and on her head she wore a crown of pure white lilies. The look upon her face was one of such exquisite sweetness, such maternal tenderness, it might well have served for that of the Virgin Mother herself. The attitudes, the expressions of both were the most perfect realization of angelic beauty I have seen, and for some moments I could but gaze at them expecting them to melt away before my eyes. At last I turned to my father and asked how such lovely figures came to be in my room, and why they were represented with wings, since I had been told that angels had not really wings growing from their bodies at all. "My son," he answered, "these lovely figures are the gift of your mother and myself to you, and we would fain think of you as reposing under the shadow of their wings, which represent in a material form the protection we would ever give you. They are shown with wings because that is the symbol of the angelic spheres, but if you will look closely at them you will find that these wings are like a part of the drapery of the forms, and are not attached to the bodies at all as though they grew from the shoulder in the fashion earthly artists represent them. The wings, moreover, express the power of angelic beings to soar upon these outstretched pinions into heaven itself. The shining helmet and the sword represent war, the helmet the war of the intellect against error, darkness and oppression. The sword, the war man must ever wage against the passions of his lower nature. The crown symbolizes the glory of virtue and self-conquest. The harp in the woman's hand shows that she is an angel of the musical sphere, and the crown of lilies expresses purity and love. Her hand resting on the man's shoulder is to show that she derives her strength and power from him and from his stronger nature, while her attitude and looks as she bends over your couch express the tender love and protection of woman's maternal nature.
She is smaller than the man because in you the masculine elements are stronger than the feminine. In some representation of the angels of man's soul, they are made of equal size and stature because in those characters the masculine and feminine elements are both equal, both evenly balanced. But with you it is not so, therefore they are represented with the woman dependent upon the stronger one. The male angel typifies power and protection. The female angel, purity and love. Together they show the eternal dual nature of the soul and that one half is not complete without the other. They also are the symbolical representation of the twin guardian angels of your soul, whose wings may be said in a spiritual sense to be ever outstretched in protection over you. Shall I confess that even in that beautiful home there were times when I felt lonely? I had this home earned by myself, but as yet I had no one to share it with me, and I have always felt a pleasure to be doubly sweet when there was someone whom I could feel and enjoy it also. The one companion of all others for whom I sighed was still on earth, and alas, I knew that not for many years could she join me. Then faithful friend was in a circle of the sphere above me in a home of his own, and as for Asen, he was far above us both, so that thought I saw them at times as well as my dear father and mother. There was no one to share my life with me en bon camarade, no one to watch for my home coming, and no one for whom in my turn I could watch. I was often on earth, often with my darling, but I found that with my advanced position in the spirit world I could not remain for so long at a time as I had been wont to do. I had upon my spirit much the effect of trying to live in a foggy atmosphere or down a coal mine, and I had to return more frequently to the spirit land to recover myself. I used to sit in my lovely rooms and sigh to myself, "Ah, if I had but some one to speak with, some congenital soul to whom I might express all the thoughts which crowd my mind." It was therefore with the greatest pleasure that I received a visit from faithful friend and heard the suggestion he had to make to me. "I have come," he said, "on behalf of a friend who has just come to the circle of the sphere, but who has not yet earned for himself a home of his own, and therefore desires to find one with some friend more richly endowed than himself. He has no relatives here, and I thought that you might be glad of his companionship." "Most truly I would be delighted to share my home with your friend." Faithful friend laughed. "He may be called your friend also, for you know him. It is Benedetto." "Benedetto!" I cried in astonishment and delight. "Ah, then he will indeed be doubly welcome. Bring him here as soon as possible." "He is here now. He awaits at your door. He could not come with me till he was sure you would really be glad to welcome him." "No one could be more so," I said. "Let us go at once and bring him in." So we went to the door, and there he stood, looking very different from when I had last seen him in that awful city of the lower sphere, then so sad, weighed down, so oppressed, now so bright, his robes like mine of purest white, and though his face was still sad in expression, yet there was peace, and there was hope in the eyes he raised to mine as I clasped his hand and embraced him as we of the southern land embrace those we love and honor. It was with much pleasure that we met, we who had both so sinned and so suffered, and we were henceforth to be as brothers. Thus it was that my home became no more solitary, for when one of us returns from our labors, the other is there to greet him, to share the joy and the care, and to talk over the success or the failure.